on a sort of a mission, and what I'm really here to do is to share that with you. I'm trying to promote the idea of a more back-to-basics approach to art appreciation and to art history. I came to that because I spend a lot of time in museum galleries, and I have to admit that I sort of eavesdrop on the people that I see there. And they actually have very interesting conversations, and I listen. And like when they're in front of a painting like this one, which is by Van Gogh, they usually talk about things like the tragedy of his life, his relationship with his brother. They often talk about his break with tradition and the French academies. And I really get the idea that they aren't really looking at the painting, but they're looking at something inside their own mind's eye, and they're responding to that. And I have the idea that they could just as easily be looking at a photo in a book or at a poster. And in fact, this is a photo of a poster. The actual painting is much more powerful. It's physical. It's a thing. It's an object, not an idea. It has very much intense power, and I just wonder why sometimes people in the galleries don't just look across the gallery space, see a painting, walk up to it, and just spontaneously react to it, say something like, "Oh my God, that blue, it's so beautiful," or "that red, that yellow, they're incredible." Because these are actually the kinds of things that the artists say when they're painting the paintings. So that's my idea. My goal is to offer people a connection back to the artist and to the paintings through the materials themselves that the artist knew and used and touched. Now, I don't mean to do that at the expense of traditional art history. I don't want to change that. I'd like to add something to it, sort of take the black and white of theory and craft and blend them together into an interesting gray. Because I think, after all, we have all recently learned there are 50 shades of gray. Well, I'm here to tell you there really are 50 shades of gray. Or there were in the past when people made their own paint. Because paint is not one thing that comes in many different colors. Each color is a completely different thing. So black, for example, is carbon, charred things like, think of charcoal. And today, everyone uses this black. It comes in a tube. It's called ivory black. That's sort of a fanciful name for it because actually it's charred animal bone. So when you paint something black, what you're really doing is coating it with animal bone. In the past, now everyone today uses that same black, so all the blacks look alike and all of the grays look alike. That's not very interesting, so people don't really focus on materials very much. But in the past, people made their own paint. And they made the black from all different kinds of things. They did make it from bone, but they called it bone black, not ivory black, because they also made it from ivory. And they made it from other things too, like the pits from fruits, like peaches and apricots. They took grape stems and they made it from that. They burnt things like resins and oils, and they collected the soot. And each one of these blacks made a different kind of effect in the painting, and then each gray that you would make from those was unique and beautiful. So I kind of came to this information accidentally. I was interested in paintings like this one. This is a 14th century altarpiece. It was painted in Italy. And what I really loved about it was the way that the interesting and intricate flat gilding of the background came up and juxtaposed against the three-dimensional figures in the foreground. And of course the color, which is really beautiful and intense but never garish. So I wanted to make paintings that incorporated these kinds of qualities, contemporary paintings, but with this kind of element to it. And somehow I couldn't make it happen. And I really didn't understand why, because I was a college-level art instructor. I taught figure drawing. I didn't really think it was skills, and eventually it came to me, it wasn't skills, it was my materials, my modern materials. They're nothing like these, and so they don't work the same way. So it didn't take me very long to find out that the people that left us these really beautiful paintings also left instructions. They left how-to manuals from the Middle Ages, studio manuals, treatises, things like that, and I thought, great, the instructions are here, I'll just follow them and I'll be able to make the paintings that I want to make. It turned out to be a little harder than I expected. the terms are very archaic, so it took a long time to even understand what they were talking about. And then when I did, the instructions were a little more vague than I had hoped. They would say things like, take a bean of this and a nut of that, and I would be going, well, if I'm in Paris in the 15th century, I wonder what kind of beans I would have, or what kind of nut, a walnut, a hazelnut. That would make a big difference in a recipe. And then my favorite instruction, which came up way more than I hoped it would say, like, use as much as you know is right. And of course, no idea how much would be right. So a lot of trial and error, a lot of practice, many, many paintings later, I actually did learn to do what I had wanted to do and make the paintings I wanted to make, but I gained something else, something I had really not expected, and that was a kind of a connection to the paintings and to the artists from having worked with their materials. So that's what I try to offer to people now. I try to offer them a different way to connect to the paintings by introducing them to some of the materials. So the first one that I'd like to introduce you to is really the simplest of all the pigments. It's really an ancient pigment. It's an earth pigment. We call it ochre. Ochre can be found on the walls of the caves in Lascaux. Greeks used it, Romans used it, Rembrandt loved it. We all use it today. So artists today refer to it as an earth tone, and they get it in tubes like this. This is yellow ochre. But what most of them don't really understand, it's not just an earth tone. It's actually earth, it's dirt. So it comes in the form of a dirt clot. Now, much of it comes from Provence, where the food and wine are fabulous, and even the dirt is beautiful. So the people have been collecting it forever in clumps like this. And it makes perfect paint. So if you would think about dirt, you put water in it, you get mud, it'll cover your shoes, the side of your car, whatever, in a nice creamy layer. Well, that's what we actually want from paint. So it makes perfect paint. So all you have to do for a natural clot like this is grind it up. And instead of adding water and making mud, you would add linseed oil if you wanted to make oil paint, or acrylic emulsion if you wanted to make modern acrylic paint. You could add gum arabic if you want to make watercolor paint. Whatever it was, you just clean out the bugs in the dirt and you can make paint. And not only is it a beautiful golden color like that, but ochres come in all of these different shades. And they're all beautiful and unique, and you find them in all the paintings. And in the past, artists really took pleasure in collecting as many different kinds as they could and using all of them. Not only does the earth come in yellows, it comes in this whole rainbow of colors. And all of these were used in the past to make paint, and all of them are beautiful. The yellow and the red are kind of familiar to people, especially in the Southwest. If you've been to Texas, you've seen a lot of red earth. The green there comes from Bohemia, and it's also found in Greece and Italy. It was very important in the past. It was used as an underpainting to the flesh tones. And then the lavender jar in the middle, that was found near a slate mine, and that kind of lavender earth was very important to the manuscript illuminators. So all of these are beautiful. Very few of these are available in tubes today, but all of them are on the walls in art museums. So these are kind of the simplest of pigments, just dirt. They're beautiful, but they can't satisfy all the needs of painters. So from the time of the old masters like Rubens here, to modern masters over here like Cézanne, they had to come up with some more intricate arrangements to make colors like scarlet red, for example. So what they would do is they would take a color called vermilion. Now, vermilion is an interesting color because it was a gift to us, an accidental gift from medieval alchemists. They were trying to make gold, and they thought if you could take mercury and sulfur and combine them in just the right way, you could make gold. Well, sadly you can't, but they kept coming up with this red material. So the artists were only too happy to take it off their hands and use it in the paintings because it's really a fabulous paint. It's very creamy, it covers perfectly. No one uses it anymore because it's extremely poisonous. It's made out of mercury, but it's really a fabulous paint. Anyway, they would underpaint the image with this vermilion and let it dry. And then they would put on top of it a really brilliant, transparent glaze color, what I'm calling here an organic glaze. I'm calling it organic because it's either coming from a plant or an animal. It can't be used by itself, it's too transparent, but it's really, really beautiful. And when you put the one over the other, you get this really jewel-like sort of stained glass window effect. So everybody made use of that. This is a prickly pear cactus, and it's got a terrible insect infestation on it. Everywhere where you see one of these little white puffy spots, there's a little scaly insect underneath there. It's a terrible thing if you're a gardener and you have a cactus garden, but it's a fabulous thing if you want to make paint. So underneath every one of these is a little insect called a cochineal, and you can see them dried up in the top of the larger bowl up there. So you would collect up all these insects and grind them up, and for centuries people have made beautiful dyes and pigments out of them, and they range from beautiful, beautiful scarlets all the way down to burgundies and maroon kinds of colors. They're really lovely. And sometimes people find it a little strange that this beautiful pigment is coming from an insect, but really everybody here is quite familiar with these because they're used as a coloring in food, and they're the pink in everybody's lipstick. They're organic. Okay, this is another source of organic reds. This little strange thing I have in my hand here is a root from a plant called a madder plant, so it's a madder root. It's kind of a terrible weedy plant. This one came from my garden, and I don't recommend growing your own for this because you can't get rid of it. I've been pulling them out of the garden for years now. I don't really need this much of it, and it's very hard to garden around. It's got these little hairs on it that sting you when you try to go near it, so it's a really terrible plant, but it's really worth the aggravation because the pigments that come out of it are really beautiful. Soft pinks, kind of peach colors, really beautiful transparent glaze colors. Another one, and I think my favorite one, this one is called dragon's blood. And as every medieval painter knew, dragons and elephants are mortal enemies. And when they meet, they fight. And the dragons always kill the elephants by biting them. But just before they die, the elephants kill the dragons back by falling on them. So their blood commingles, and this is what it looks like. And then people collect it, and they dry it, and then they use it as a pigment. Now, that's actually the interpretation and description that works for me. But there are other people who say that it's the resinous sap from a tree. I don't know. This one is actually a baby, and it's growing in my own garden. And no elephants have shown up, so, I just leave it to you. Anyway, at the time that Cézanne painted that flower that I showed you when I showed you the two red paintings, the Lafranc company in Paris offered 30 different kinds of organic reds. Each one is really interesting. Each one has a unique story to it, like a tree with bark so beautiful and red that a whole country was named after it, Brazil. Each one of them is interesting. Each one of them is beautiful, and I wish that I could show them all to you, but Andy was wrong. We don't get 15 minutes, we get 18. But still, I think I'm probably getting kind of to the end of mine, so I don't want to go over. And I do want to leave you with one last pigment that I think is very interesting and really not used anymore today, and that is gold. Now, we usually think of pigments as, well, we don't think of metallics as pigments, but people did in the past. They would take the gold and they would grind it and mix it with binders just like any other pigment, just like the earth's, and paint with it. And then they would also hammer it out into little thin leaves. The leaves are just as thin as like a butterfly's wing, and they would lay them into the backs of paintings and put in backgrounds. They're really beautiful, they're seductive. Once you start using them, you really just can't stop. I speak from experience. And I really think it's an untapped resource that I wish more artists would look into today. But I would hope that people would kind of keep it in mind that they could enliven their paintings. Like, what if Jackson Pollock had known how to gild or something? Like, we just make something really interesting. Oops. So as I leave, I just hope that I've opened up a little bit of interest into the materials of the past and that maybe that can connect you to the paintings. Maybe it can give you sort of a touchstone to feel that things are more human, that maybe a person really made these things. And if not, I just hope you'll have the feeling that it's just okay to think the paintings are beautiful and just enjoy them for that. Thank you.